I call it like the three P's. Basically, it was process, people, and then promotion and presence. So then I
Mhm.
was enabled to be more creative, more, to show up and to get more clarity from my audience on what was going on, get a pulse, if you will,
Yeah.
to use more
Yeah.
P words.
Yeah.
So, uh, that was kind of my 2022 in my like building my multi six figure business. How would you interpret what I just described in terms of the Eastern perspective? I'm really interested
Yeah.
in that in terms of like, do you see that a lot? What are you hearing when I say that? I just want to get your perspective. Hey, Kat, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on.
I am so excited to be here.
So, can you just say hello to our audience and tell them a little bit about you and just introduce yourself?
Sounds great. Hello, friends. So my name is Kat Lee. I know that y'all got my intro just a moment ago, and I am a spiritual business mentor. And I think the pieces that are relevant to our conversation today is that I've been running businesses since 2000, oh gosh, I think since 2008 now. And and in my previous life, I was an acupuncturist, and Shannon asked me to come on and chat about this intersectionality of my background in Eastern medicine, Eastern philosophy, and how that applies to business. And it's like one of my, honestly, I can just talk about this for days and days and days. And so I'm really excited to be here and just nerd out with you, Shannon.
Totally. And the cool thing is that this is genuinely me asking questions because I don't know a whole lot about Eastern medicine or how it connects to business. I'm kind of on the other side of the brain in a sense, literally just Western culture, Western raised, and the business strategy, the degree, the science of it all, right?
Hmm.
So I'm intrigued to learn more about this because it should shift a little bit of my perspective and offer something new. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you just enlighten us a little bit with how you, and this is such a broad question, but like, how do you integrate what you learned about Eastern medicine into business? Like, how did you make that connection that
Mhm.
they could integrate?
Yeah. So the two biggest pieces that we can sort of like get a little bit deeper into is there's this concept called the Tao.
Hmm.
And the Tao is it's really hard to translate into English, but essentially it's kind of like your life purpose. It's the thing that drives you. It's that like deep seed within where it's like, I know, I was born to do this thing. And, it's not always a career, like, this is what I do for a living sort of a situation. It's more of like, this is how you embody. And in you embodying that particular, in my clients, I help them come up with a word. When you embody that word, it really ripples into everything that you do. And that includes your business. And your business should be led by your Tao in order for it to feel like really empowering for you and just like, this is like where I am supposed to be. So there's that piece that we could sort of like jump into in a moment. And then the other piece is this concept around cycles. So a lot of Western culture is about growth for growth's sake. Let's just make sure that each quarter is, higher than the next quarter. There's not a lot of thought around sustainability. In my clients, I take it even beyond sustainability, and we talk about regenerative business practices, meaning that you are not just keeping, the ethics and the values alive in your business. It's like you're also creating a better world by having a business. And that has to be run through cycles, in my opinion. And that's sort of the main pieces that I bring into business work with Eastern philosophy. And we use the framework of the five elements because there's five elements in nature. Every element has its time and its place. And I believe that the business also, if we follow these phases that we see in nature, we are able to stay grounded, not get burnt out, not get frustrated, be able to show up for our clients in really ethical ways. So that's kind of like the overarching like two umbrellas that I generally like to talk about with like people who are just like, let's get the bare bones of it in.
I love that. And I think you're right. When you really break it down, we're all about growth and improvement and better, 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 and not giving ourselves kind of a break and not
Mhm.
forgiving ourselves for what is a natural cycle. I think we're tempted in Western culture, I'll call it, to defy nature.
Mhm. Yeah,
To like
absolutely.
we're in competition with it as opposed to in flow with it. Do you feel like that's the case?
I do. And that's why I think that, when we look at sort of the unethical business practices that we see, whether it's in big corporations or even in the small businesses where it's like you show up on a sales call with somebody and it just feels icky because it feels manipulative, because it feels like it's being driven by something other than, hey, I'm in service for this person. Um, and, you know, the way that I like to frame it is, it's easy to sort of like, I use the words elements and seasons interchangeably.
Mhm.
And it's almost like in the Western culture, we're stuck in the like spring phase of our businesses, meaning spring is when we're like growth and acceleration. And there's all this like stuff that happens at the like peak of spring, right?
Mhm.
And we expect to just continue on that forever, instead of recognizing that actually there's moments to slow down in the summer season, and then there's moments to like reap the harvest, and we have to be really intentional about that in the autumn season. And then in the winter season, it's really important to slow down even more so that you can root down into like, okay, like we've had a good year, and how do we make sure that we continue to root into our intentionality as we move into our next phase. So that's sort of how I think about it. It's like
And
we're just
and
stuck in spring.
and with the seasons, right? It's not always a literal translation of economic seasons. So,
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
example, like when you say the winter, that doesn't mean a low point when you're at a loss in your business, or spring
No.
meaning you're up. It's not a performance driven season, right? When you're talking about these seasons, can you
Exactly.
give like some examples of what you would consider, um, we'll call it symptoms or traits of each season?
Awesome. I love that question. I did a entire series this year with my best friend, Christina Ciccone. She and I went to, actually, she and I worked at a really busy acupuncture clinic together, and we ended up quitting together around the same time. And we go into each of these seasons at the season that it was happening this last year. So we're about to finish up with the winter season. But yeah, so if we start out in let's start with the metal or the fall season. That's like a really good place to start, because if we don't, so the whole piece around metal and fall is it like the word that I think of is clarity. And, you see that with the trees that are shedding their leaves. And this is the time to prune when you're a farmer, is because the leaves have shed. You get to actually see the branches for what they are, and you get to be like, oh, so that branch doesn't look quite right, so I'm gonna prune that back. Or, I want to make sure that the tree look is balanced so that we can have a good healthy fruiting season next year. So like if you take that concept of like pruning trees and you apply it to your business, we need clarity, and so in like when I say symptomology, or when we talk about symptomology, it's like people who are unclear about their niche, for example, people who are unclear about what values they even stand for in their business, people who are feeling kind of muddy. And we do a lot of trauma informed work in my program, because so many of the business decisions that we make are often made from a place of scarcity and lack, and perhaps a previous wound that you're trying to work through. And when we make decisions from that place, it creates a really muddy sort of field with your business, right? And so like that piece around clarity is kind of like my driving thing when we're in like metal autumn season. The next season would be winter. And I think about that as being like the rooting season. So if we're going to take this analogy of the tree even further, this is when the tree takes all of its sugars and puts it into the roots. And it's not just hanging out in the winter, it's in storage mode, it's getting ready for the spring. And so we need that rooting down energy in our businesses, because it's like, okay, so who is your client? What are they saying? What kind of problems do they need help with? And when you can root down and get really slow and intentional and listen, like I think a lot of us in business go into business because we're really stoked about an idea. And I definitely did this too. We're so excited about an idea. And then we forget to listen to the people who are actually going to be buying our product. And, you know, when we can root down and listen to our people, we can use their words so that they feel seen, known, heard, and understood. And then they're more likely to come hang out with you or, you know, purchase your offers. And so that's kind of like the piece around winter. Next phase is spring, and this is the phase that like everyone, like there's a billion and one like business programs out there that teach about spring, right? Download this template, here's the sales call. Like it's a little bit more of an external season, right? And so we see that. And for me, it's about, okay, you've taken this time to really hone in on your values and taken the time to really understand your client. And now let's take that and have some conscious marketing practices. And so how can you really um, enter into a relationship with words so that you're not in a way that you're like not manipulating people, and you're really focusing in on connection and pulling people in through connection instead of let's pound on that scarcity wound and, you know, try to get someone to sign up with you because it's going to fill your cup more than it's actually going to help them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think the imagery I'm picturing, honestly, with spring is you've planted the seeds by doing all that work,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're blooming. And now you can use
Absolutely.
them, you can see the impact. And then what you just described, I actually pictured watering them, you
Mm-hmm.
know, putting them into
Absolutely.
practice, like having, like helping them thrive and seeing where they grow to.
Yeah. And there's actually a really beautiful nurturing energy that has to come through in the spring. If you're living in alignment with the seasons, it's like, that's when you're sort of like making sure that the garden beds are nice and healthy. And, you know, as the ground is thawing, then you have to do a little bit of work to compost and, you know, make sure that the soil is healthy so that the fruit then is nice and healthy, right? Um, and then from that phase, we go into summer, and summer is all about connection, because it's like, think about what you do in the summertime. Like everything sort of is really external now. And so it's about how do you show up in service to your client in a way that's not codependent, you know? And so when I look at, I mean, business is relational. Like as much as we want to take emotions out of business, we really can't. And when we look at relationships, there are so many ways in which people get entangled and play out maybe old family patterns with their clients and take things personally because they're like, oh, this feels like a rejection, and I've been rejected in my family before. And so then I'm going to bring on all of my survival strategies that have worked for me in my past, in my perhaps unbalanced family dynamics, and play them out with my clients. And that's not fair for your clients. It also, you know, if we're talking about regenerative practices, it's not really helping creating a healing space for the world. You know, I really think about business as actually a vehicle to help heal a lot of these imbalances that we see. And then from there, we have late summer. We have a fifth season in Taoist medicine that's a little bit, you know, and it's sort of that like transition phase between high summer and autumn where all the fruit is ripening, right? And so this is where I start thinking about harvest practices in your business. So what does the back end of your business look like? Is it set up in such a way that you can recreate this in the future? Um, we take a look at, the actual fruit of it. And when we do that, it's like it relates back to that autumn season, because if you pruned back an apple tree, then you've got maybe 5 branches that are producing really, really great fruit, or you've got 15 branches that create kind of shitty fruit, right? And so this is the phase at which we can kind of analyze, like, do we need to think about pruning back in order to have a more successful harvest in the future? And, this is where I think I bring in a lot of other people in terms of other professionals, because this is where, I'd bring on someone like you as a tax strategist to help us really understand what are the dynamics of the finances that are going on and how can we improve that. Bring on a bookkeeper, bring
Hmm.
in, somebody who's going to help you automate systems, so that's kind of like the symptomology, if that makes sense. That was that
Totally.
was a long ramble.
Totally. Totally. That makes sense. And would you say, because we all like to, I mean, if anyone's brain works like mine, which I think a lot of business owners do, it's like you want to
Mhm.
apply a framework to it and go, okay, so if I apply this concept, am I going through these seasons every 3 months? Is this truly, are they in
Mm.
order? Are they linear? Are they cyclical?
Yeah.
Are they, you know, is this like, okay, I know where I am. Does that mean I'm headed here next? Like,
Mhm.
is there kind of a set path that it follows? Or is it kind of like you just have to be conscious of what season you're in and that can just kind of ebb and flow with, with where you're at in your business?
Yeah. I would say that for a new business owner, it's a little bit more linear. And so I've been running my program for a while now, and I see with new business owners, like, moving through it in this particular order. So, like, you know, starting in the autumn, going all the way back into autumn, um, is a really good framework to follow, because, like, a lot of us aren't asked, like, what are your values? What are your ethics? What, like, where do you want to start even? And then, sort of moving it through. Having been through many years of business at this point, I feel like it's more appropriate to say, like, okay, like, let's recognize that I'm in a winter season right now. And what do I want to do in this winter season? Let's recognize that I'm in a spring season. What can I do? And how can I take care of myself? That's like a big one in each of these seasons, is how can you also incorporate pieces of self-care so that you aren't burning yourself out? And so, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does because I think that most entrepreneurs would say, okay, I feel like I resonate with one of those seasons right now. Does
Yeah.
that mean I am going to be in this season next in a couple of months? Like we
Yeah.
all want to, we're familiar with the seasons of around us. We're familiar with the four seasons, especially those of us in the Northeast United States. Um, and we tend to we want to apply that and say, okay, does that mean that it coincides with this? Is there some connection to it? But I think that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to always follow the, like, actual seasons that are outside of your door. And,
Right.
you know, especially having lived somewhere where there is weather, you start seeing these patterns where there's, like, a general trend towards spring, but then every once in a while it, like, flips back into winter for a little while, and you just have to be okay with that, right? And so I think
Mhm.
that, once you have a little bit of time with a business under your belt, that's kind of what happens.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And do you feel like the seasons get longer, shorter? Do they change the more you're in your business? So like, a business owner who's brand new, maybe like you said, spends more time in spring. Would you say
Hmm.
a business owner who's more mature, spends less time in their seasons, they kind of go, go, go? Or do they, I mean, what have you seen from clients and from those that you see?
Yeah, so I would actually say that new business owners could benefit from spending a lot more time in metal in the autumn and in the winter, because there's not a lot of people who are going into their work with, like, really, really strong intentions, and then they get, like, once you get into, like, spring energy, it's like you have to kind of move around a lot of pieces. And so if you don't have that rooted energy of like, okay, so these are the things I want to talk about, these are my values, this is my person, my dream client, then it's really easy to get pulled into multiple different directions, I would say.
Right.
um, I think that for me personally, like when I look at the trajectory of my own business, um, I would say a year ago I spent a lot of time in spring, meaning I was in a launch like fairly regularly. Now that my business is starting to shift and I have like a bit of staff, and I don't have to do everything by myself, it feels more like there's like late summer energy
Hmm.
where we're optimizing like the back end of the business so that it can continue to run without me having to do every single piece. But I will say that I return to each of these seasons at least once a year,
Hmm.
because, sometimes when I'm sitting down to write a social media post, for example, like I'm pulled into a lot of different directions because I have a lot of different interests,
Yeah.
and so it's easy to get sort of sucked into different arenas of wanting to talk about things, and you kind of have to return back to the metal to get that clarification.
So I'm going to use myself as an example and
Yes.
say, because I'm actually writing this down real quick. So I have a framework sort of that I use this year that I realized I went through what I call three seasons of 2022, that I like
Mm,
three phases, if you will.
yeah.
When I started the year, I was heavily focused on building process operations, writing down what we were doing, and building the frameworks and infrastructure, because I knew we were getting to a point where I needed to focus on people in the middle of the summer and
Hmm.
the spring. So I knew
Hmm.
that I was going to have to grow the team. I knew that I was going to have to have people join the team and be
Hmm.
ready for that and have trainings and things that I could share so that it was a positive experience and that it worked out. And then I really leaned into, once the people were there, I really went into a phase of, I call it like the three P's. Basically, it was process, people, and then promotion and presence. So then I
Hmm.
was enabled to be more creative, more, to show up and to get more clarity from my audience on what was going on, get a pulse, if you will,
Yeah.
to use more
Yeah.
P words.
Yeah.
So, uh, that was kind of my 2022 in my like building my multi six figure business. How would you interpret what I just described in terms of the Eastern perspective? I'm really
Yeah.
interested in that, in terms of like, do you see that a lot? What are you hearing when I say that? I just want to get your perspective.
Yeah. So when I can you share the P words again? So
Yeah, so
process,
I was
people,
process
and
people, and then I called it promotion or
okay.
presence.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're somebody who's been in business for a while. And so this is the perfect example of, you can recognize which part of this like the cycle that you're in, and you get to just sort of sit there and embody that. So in that process phase, you're in, like, I would say, like overarchingly, if we
Hmm.
look at your year, you're kind of in like late summer, right? And
Yeah,
so late summer is again about like optimizing the back end systems, making sure that like the support is there. And it's also a big like harvest kind of a year, right? And
kind
so
of
you were able,
taking the ideas I had and like putting them to practice, right? So I felt like I was dumping out all my, okay, everything that I've been up to for the past 3 years, we're making a thing out of it. Like we're gonna
yeah,
go create this. Yeah.
yeah, awesome. And so like I would say overarching theme is probably like late summer energy for your entire year. But if we
Cool.
break it down into the three sort of like phases that you talked about, that process, right? So, and even like I would say the people, because it was more about like internal, like setting up your people, right?
Hmm.
So I would say that that's still like late summer energy is making sure that your people are set up. And then I've been watching you for a while. I mean, you know you are my tax strategist as well. So like, there's a reason that like I was drawn to your work. And so like setting up your systems has allowed you to really clarify what it is that you do, which is sort of like that metal energy. And you've like sat a little bit of time in there, but I imagine not a ton of time. And then you're sort of now in this like spring summer energy where your role has now shifted away from doing all the things, and it's more about connection. So it's about
Right.
connecting with your people externally. And so that's sort of how I see your work. And as somebody who's not just been like sitting and watching you on the sidelines, but like actually actively,
Yeah.
partaking in your work, like that's, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's so funny because it feels like I hibernated for a while to go build all this stuff. I'm like, it
Yeah.
feels like winter, but it's not literally translated as to like how you feel. It's going to
Yeah.
be what in the cycle it works. So I love how you use that analogy. Going back though, other than the four seasons, right? How else do you integrate sort of Eastern medicine and concepts? Like, what have been the most impactful for your clients to realize those like aha moments where it kind of connects and they get it, like they really start seeing the connection?
Yeah. Um, I would say it always comes back to the Tao for me. Um, Tao is really the thing that we're I think of it as like I was born here to do this thing. And so my Tao, I'll just share, is surrender. That's like the one word that drives everything that I do. And for me, surrender can only be described in contrast to my wound, which is control. And so, what I mean by surrender is, can I be in a co creative relationship with my business or my relationships? It really like weaves its way into everything that I do. And in that process of co creation, there's a level of release because what my survival strategy part wants to do is control everything. And so I grew up in a bit of a tumultuous family where I had to control literally people and circumstances and events in order for things to not fall apart. And so that survival part of my, history thinks, oh, anytime something feels like it's out of control, I need to then tighten my grip on everything. And that's a very, very easy place for me to go to. And what I've learned is that as I've leaned more into my Tao of surrender, and, whether that's in big decisions or small decisions, that like I'm given an opportunity to lean into that multiple times a day, a week. um, and the more I'm able to lean into that word and that energy and embody it, things open up in ways that I could have never imagined. And so I lead my clients, they each get a one on one session with me through my program. I lead my clients through a meditation, and we come up with what is their word. And, some people have come in with love or beauty or, unbelievable is one that came up this week. And it's almost like that word gives you permission to step into, hmm, like, constitutionally how you've wanted to operate your life and have been afraid to. Um, and, it seems kind of weird to say that my business plan is to surrender, but that's really the piece that weaves its way through everything that I do. And that's also in like how I approach the nuts and bolts of the business, but also in how I approach my client care. I come from a very Western background. I did fertility acupuncture for a very long time. So we're working hand in hand with doctors who literally controlled people's hormones. Um, and, to get a particular end result. And it was a lot of prescription. It was a lot of control. It was a lot of like, you have to do things in this particular way, in this particular time. And now with my clients, what I love is that when you really empower people and help them see that they've had the answers within them all this time, and then you give them tools, you get to just sort of step back and just like see magic unfold. Like that's my favorite part of doing this work is like some of these people come in with one idea to like start out in the program and then they end up with a completely different business because they were able to tap into this Tao that we get to in the very first module of the program.
Yeah, it's like they're following someone else's compass.
Yeah,
And then they
exactly.
finally get to see where their internal compass has been pointing them that they've been ignoring or maybe just didn't know about.
Yeah.
Um, I can totally relate to that because I realize there's
Mm,
like a lot of pull and tug inside of like what I want to be doing, what I am doing, what's logical, what is, there's something deeper to it where I've heard the phrase like your purpose, right? Your purpose is kind of the intersection of um where you are useful, like where you're needed, where what can actually make you money and drive, actual profit, but also what you desire to do. So like I say whatever you're good at, you like doing
hmm.
and can actually make money. I'm like that is your sweet spot of a business. But I think a lot of people miss out on the what I want to do part. Like I'm
Yeah.
good at this and it makes money and that was my life for 15 years, right? I'm good at accounting
Yeah.
and it makes me money and I do like it. But I
Yeah.
think I didn't like how I was applying it or how I was showing up doing it because you're working for a lot of folks. And I can relate to this with control and saying you have to work 80 hours a week. And how dare
I
you
know.
leave at 7 p.m. before the boss leaves, even though you're done with your work, right? So
Yeah.
it's that culture of like push, push, push. And I'm like, but why?
Yeah.
But it's
Absolutely.
superficial. And
Yeah.
then when you really strip it back, you go, there's no reason for this. Like what is the purpose? And I absolutely love that. I love how you connect that theory and kind of again like strip away all the external judgment, the external factors and say like what are you designed to do and where can you best serve where you are happy but also you can deliver value and show up for people. I think that's
Yeah.
such a cool thing. When people discover that, it's like the best feeling in the world.
Yeah. And I love how you phrased it. And I would also say that another important part of that is, can we hold compassion for those conditions and the ways in which you've had to operate? Because it's not bad that once upon a
Right.
time we were both like in a very controlled environment. It's just what we thought we needed to do in order to survive in this life. And, once you, again, as you said, like strip away all of that, and you're left with this beautiful seed of, oh, this is what I'm just like stoked to do, and it makes me money. Like that's an amazing feeling to have.
Yeah, and I hope for that for everyone. And that's also what I hope everyone
Mhm.
listening can relate to and is on their mission to find, even if they haven't found it yet. As long as you're on that mission to find it and you're conscious of the fact that you're looking for it, you'll find it.
Yeah, yeah. And if I could just speak to the like people pleasers for a moment there,
Yeah.
because I definitely was in that place where it's like, you're good at this thing. It's kind of crazy, but I burned my acupuncture license, which I had spent, you know, many years pursuing, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on my degree, and I burned it 3 years ago now. And I got so many messages from old clients and people who follow me on Instagram who were like, how can you do that? You're so good at that thing. And it was like, I recognized that I'm good at that thing, but it was also slowly just like killing me inside, because it was like similar to you. I worked 60 hours a week sometimes. I was on call all the time. And, it was just in a system that didn't work. And so I just want to say, if you're a people pleaser and you're listening to this right now, even if you're good at that thing, like you're not obligated to share that thing with the world. You have, mm, like, you just have this one life. Like,
Hmm.
take the permission slip to actually do the thing that brings you so much joy and just lights you up on the inside. Because for me, that thing was holding space for people. I feel like I hold space for people, whether it's in the acupuncture room or with my clients who are trying to run their businesses. And that's the thing that lights me up. And, for you, it wasn't accounting in the like classical sense. It's,
Hmm.
having worked with you, I think the way that your brain and the way that your heart works is you love just empowering people to take charge of their finances, you know?
Yeah.
And and if I could just put a little plug in here for you, I was in a deep freeze state with my own business finances for a very long time. Like I said, I've been, you know, running some form of a side hustle or a business since 2008. And I didn't shift into LLC S Corp until this year when I met you. And it's been this like gigantic monster of a thing that I thought was going to be so complicated and so hard. And I put it off for so many years. And if you're considering this person who's listening, just do the thing.
Yeah.
It's so much more simple than you make it out to be in your head.
I think, yeah, I say time adds complexity. Like the
Yeah,
more you wait, the more it just like gathers dust and it's harder to clean. And you're like,
yeah,
just do it because then you don't have
yeah,
to worry about that later. It's so true. Or like it's really like a, anything that you have to treat. It's like if you leave it there, it will just get bigger. And it's better to just take care of it. Even if and it's not even negative. It's just something small on the to-do list, like opening a bank account that takes 20 minutes or starting an LLC that honestly takes a week or so to get back. It really is easier than you think it is. And I
yeah,
think that breaking down the barrier to that type of stuff and making it less intimidating is part of why I like doing what I do, because there are so many people out there who want to start a business, who are destined to start a business and have it like they're called to do it. But this kind of stuff is holding them back. And I go, oh, this is a sad excuse to hold you back. Let me show you how easy this is. And it's the barrier is not as bad as you guys think it is. And I think that once you realize that, and you're not the first person who's told me that, once you realize how easy it truly is, number one, you go, oh, that's it? Yeah. It's kind of that like shot you fear at the doctor, and then you're like, oh, did it happened? But you build yourself up into this like fear state. And I
yeah.
think that it just compounds because you make up
Mhm.
all these stories in your head. And that could go for the legal and accounting side of business, or that could go for anything. That could go for firing someone. That could go for letting go of a client that doesn't serve you anymore because they're out of alignment with your values. It could be
Yeah,
anything that you're dreading doing is only going to get harder by not doing it.
yeah, yeah. And I think that this is the place where like I love to do this kind of work is because when somebody tells me they're afraid to do that thing, whether like for me it was, doing the LLCS Corp thing or firing a client, all these examples that you just showed us, what that tells me is there's a dysregulated nervous system. And so we can't just push through and override. We've got to help that nervous system feel safe first, because your nervous system is detecting a threat because it's relating it back to something else that happened in your life. And so the strategy that you used back then was to freeze. And it's okay that you had that strategy, right? But when we just override, which is again a Western concept, it's really heavy in the Western culture, is like, just feel the fear and do it anyway. Instead of like, okay, let's feel the fear, find out where that fear is, actually integrate it for maybe the first time in your life. And then the steps become easy, you know?
Hmm.
Um, I think for me, like that freeze state was really around having seen my parents who were immigrants to this country, really struggle with understanding finances. They had success, like my dad had a successful business, but he was so scared of the IRS. He was so scared of these like big bureaucratic systems because he couldn't understand the language. And so, having grown up with that, he was in a state of freeze and I just inherited that. And so I needed to actually work through that and have some really heart to heart conversations with my dad in order to resolve that for myself. And that's when I called you. um, is as I was moving out of that freeze state, but that personal work had to happen beforehand. And so,
Right.
um, if that resonates with you, come talk to me. That's my jam. I love working with people in that space.
And that was what I wanted to touch on next. Can you elaborate more on how folks can work with you and what type of entrepreneur you serve, what they should be looking for?
Yeah,
Just share any advice you have on getting in touch with you, and also where they can find out more about what you're up to.
yeah. Thanks for that invitation. So I serve spiritual entrepreneurs. And that doesn't just mean that you're a Reiki practitioner or an acupuncturist. It really is, you're somebody who understands that business is a spiritual practice, meaning you're having these challenges, you're having these blocks come up in your life and in your business. And you're starting to see like, oh, the same way that I approach my business is the same way that I've approached, my relationships in the past. And there's a pattern here. So there's an opportunity to lean into the spirit of this and actually resolve it through the business. So that's kind of like my ideal person to come in. Service-based spiritual entrepreneurs is what I am calling in. And we run a group program. So 9 months, you come in with a cohort. We run through each of these seasons that we just talked about. And there's video curriculum, there's group calls, there's optional one-on-one coaching. And there's a whole community around it that I think is missing in the entrepreneurial space, because it's hard to talk about some of these things, right? Your friend who's in the traditional workforce may not quite understand, but when you've got a community behind you who can just say like, yeah, I hear you and I've been there and this is what I did to work myself through it, it's so helpful. So that program is called Business Alchemist Mentorship. And we run the cohort every couple of months now, and love to see you in there. And the way to get a hold of me is, right now it's on Instagram, Empowered Curiosity. We're working on the website right now, and it's just nuts and bolts, but there is a sales page up for BAM, and you can check that out on the website, which is empoweredcuriosity.com.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we have all those links in the show notes too for you. Kat, thank you so much for hopping on the show and sharing some of this wisdom with our audience. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. We'll see you soon.